Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, public education advocates, right? Especially this time of year. It's the Ask Dr. Be Good show, where we share the practice, the pedagogy, and the politics currently happening in public education. As always, I ask that you write your name in the comments when you come in and let me know your thoughts, observations, and comments and questions about the topic being discussed. I'm a longtime teacher, so I enjoy having an actively participating class during the show. Even if you listen later, you can still pop in your question because I'm alerted and I'll be happy to respond to your comment or question. So let's get started. We have a lot to talk about today because it's that special time of year. It's Inauguration Day coming up, right? And Inauguration Day in a especially interesting year of COVID and political unrest and just so much going on. And so an article caught my eye, and I thought, let's try to encourage educators and parents who listen to the show and who can have influence with other educators and parents about what they heard on the show, because certainly I would hope that you would all be passing this on and passing on the news that you hear, not only the understanding that they should be coming every Sunday at 8 a.m., right? Or the rebroadcast at Thursday at 6 p.m., but also that, you're available to share the news. And so let's talk about Inauguration Day. Inauguration Day is like few others in the past, right? And it provides ample curricular topics. So this event provides a variety of opportunities for educators, and I'm going to say parents, because so many of you are not only teaching at home, but also you're interested in what's going on in the current events of our world. And so let me give you some ideas to make your conversation with your kids even more interesting and relevant and profound. So the National Council for Social Studies, as you can well imagine, they're right in this. The president, Stephanie Wager, loves that this is all happening, because this is just provides fodder for the classroom and for the home discussion, right? And so from the historical elements of the day to the speech itself, there are multiple angles for the educators to work the event into a curriculum, including the symbolism of the ceremony itself. It's significant that our tradition is to have the current president at the inauguration so that it's a peaceful transition of power. That's not always the case in other countries, and may not be the case in this country this time. And that, again, should lead to very relevant, profound discussion, not only in the classroom, but at home. Education experts spoke with K2 Dive and agreed that this year's Inauguration Day ceremony, as well as the events leading up to it, differ from those that have taken place historically. That presents many ways to tie the event not only into civics and U.S. history classes, but across curriculum and grade levels as well. So they suggest that one should tap into the history, the ritual, and even the math around the Inauguration Day. So let's see how we can do that. And there's still time. We still have time before and even after. I mean, nothing stops, right? Just because the Inauguration Day is Wednesday, 20th of January, that doesn't mean we stop talking about it because it's over that day, right? Relevancy is an ongoing discussion with our kids, and we really need to make sure that we circle back with our kids and ask questions later, and especially when things come up in the news that would tie into things that we talked about with our kids. So just be thinking of this as sort of for the next week or two discussion with our kids. Okay, so appropriate lessons on the inauguration day, and whether it's an early elementary class kid or 12th grade child, the content can be scaled for each grade level to look at historical and current events, including and in the context of the inauguration. So math classes can even have some part in this. Math teachers and those of you who are math inclined parents, you can talk about the economics of the ceremony, and that comes up. If you listen to the newscasters who will be sharing information about the Inauguration Day, the talk that they do before, the actual ceremony, and they'll share a lot of information about the inaugural event. And so they will share how much things cost, how much was fundraised, how much what taxpayer dollar went into this. So be listening for that, parents, be listening for that, educators. It'll probably come up also in news articles and newspaper articles and so forth. So be looking for the economics of the ceremony, examining what taxpayers pay as opposed to what the committee had to cover through fundraising. Let's see, what else? Students can look at, and this is sort of interesting, and you'd have to dig a little bit. I don't know if it's easily found, but how many people move or change jobs because of the change in president. And so it says here, students looking at the number of people who have had to leave or start a new job and even physically move from the district right around Inauguration Day. Well, when we have a new president and they bring with them their own people, right? And so they made a comment here, which is sort of interesting. The transition involves literally thousands of people in Washington, D.C. moving with thrift shops loaded with merchandise from people who are, leaving the area. They wanted to do a quick sell and then move on back to their home state. And so that's all math. Interesting math, too. Educators can also use the inauguration as a way to teach students about the political process. I hope that's already been going on and not waiting until now. We've had an especially trying time around the political process this year. And so I hope that that has caused a lot of good discussion in the classroom and in the home. We can help classes and kids understand how the Electoral College works, and that should have been an ongoing discussion already within the home and the classrooms, and how presidents are voted into office. Noted Natalia Malum-Percela, an associate professor of history at the New School and co-host of the weekly podcast, Past Present. And so I thought I would put that link in the comments for you to look at that podcast. This is a podcast that takes a look at the history behind the current and cultural events. And I think that I would have eaten that up. I'm a big history buff. I was growing up, loved my social studies classes. So I will put that in for everyone. Even very young children who need to know about politics, right? And so the more familiar students are and kids are with the political system, the more they can engage in sophisticated critical analysis of this and any event. And of course, that's all about being able to speak at a profound level, right? I highly always encourage parents to be talking with their kids, whether at the dinner table, whether at on the walk after dinner, where we're talking about different things that have gone on in our world, including our political world. That should not be off the table. That should be very much inclusive of kids. Parse through the language. I really like this particular angle. The inauguration speech itself also presents cross-curricular opportunities, particularly for English language arts educators, those parents who are particularly good in, that language arts area. Students can be asked to parse through the words spoken or analyze the speech through the perspective of ethos, pathos, and logos of the rhetorical triangle. They can also study the emotions of the speech. They can also study the emotions the speech is trying to convey, as well as the issues and values and ethics it raises. I think that's phenomenal to be looking and listening for that and then discussing it and seeing what we heard around that. These speeches are trying to persuade the listener. And how is Biden going to do that, right? That would be a great discussion point. It doesn't matter what side of the political arena you're on. What we heard in the speech should be something that we discuss with our kids and with each other, right? Not only kids, but adults. Daisy Martin, founding director of the History and Civics Project at the University of California, Santa Cruz, added that educators can have students look at the Constitution and examine what it says about this event. And that, of course, again, I'll say that should already be happening. Younger students might consider the ceremony of it and what the ceremony means, and consider the word inauguration and what it means in context. She added that educators can also ask students to analyze language around the oath of the office, as well as the words spoken by the incoming president and how they connect to the democratic principles, rule of law, constitutional supremacy, and even the idea of public service. And so classes could look at past speeches and even poems around the inauguration. Now, I don't know how many of you remember, but at every inauguration, they do have the nation's poet or poetress say a poet during the inauguration ceremony. So be listening for that, and let's see what the topic is of the poem. Is it going to be a unifying theme? I would think, and I would hope it would be, right? There's lots of ways to bring this event into the classroom and into the home in meaningful and important ways. So questions about lessons around democracy and significance are especially well suited. And of course, many of us will be teary-eyed watching the first Black woman take executive office. And so that should garner lots of discussion as well, right? Finally, it's okay to talk about politics, right? It happens every 4 years, which, so we need to use that time before and after the inauguration to help our kids understand how much of a part they are of the political process and will be as they get older. And so it's even okay to talk about that rhetoric, right? Most notably, months of deep political divisionness and rhetoric alleging the 2020 election was stolen, which led to a January 6th insurrection in which a mob of supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol in an attempt to disrupt the certification of the electoral vote, resulting in 5 deaths. For the older kids, that's very much something that should be discussed. It's okay to talk politics in the right context, as long as we educators try to really, really stay neutral in our own political beliefs, okay? You don't do kids favors by trying to turn them into what you think we should have in the United States. Your job, educators, is to make sure you present a neutral, factual context of our political system and let our kids decide, especially as they grow older and become part of the voting process, what they believe in and who they believe is better to run the country. So teachers can ask students and parents too, what makes the democracy work, right? What the disagreements that take part in civil forums and even in the media. And we really should be asking our kids, both from a parent and a teacher standpoint, how is the media interfering? Is the media interfering with the political process? And what evidence can we find of that? So ultimately, the inauguration provides an opportunity to highlight not only the importance of staying informed around the issues of civics and current events, but also to help our kids learn how to do so. This is an opportunity in the classroom for talking about how to use their voices to stay engaged and their responsibility. The responsibility for living a civic life is about staying informed. So that's a challenge that I leave for teachers and parents this week. How will you help your child absorb the content around the inauguration and keep things to where it's about the learning based on history, based on what could happen in the future, and keeping it from being too scary or too one-sided, right? That's our challenge. All right, well, speaking of politics and scary and all of that, let's talk about the COVID vaccine. So one of the things that we have found is as quickly as our vaccine was created, and I shouldn't say our one vaccine, right? There are several. The Moderna and the Pfizer are the two that we hear most about, here in the United States at least. And the distribution of it, right? There's been some uncomfortableness on the part of educators about the fact that they are not in the first level. The first level, 1A, was health workers, healthcare workers, and people in the healthcare business. If you're in a hospital, that would mean the custodian, that would mean the receptionist, is not only the people who are actively working with sick patients. I won't say only COVID, but sick patients. It's also the people who are in that environment. And that's many, many people. And so the distribution has gone to them first. The 1B level, which is seniors over 65 or people under 65 with comorbidities, other health impaired, and so forth, that is starting to be rolled out. But unfortunately, it depends on the location. It depends on how many vaccines they've gotten. And so what we've learned is that the distribution has been a little uneven. And I know that I have friends, educator friends, who are over 65 and who have spent many days trying to find a 1B vaccine place. And they're not having much luck finding that. So, and yet others we know have already gotten it. So what does that have to do with schools? Well, let's talk about what school districts need to know about COVID-19 mandates. And so as frontline workers are vaccinated for COVID-19, many district leaders say they and their staffs are waiting, and as we are, waiting for our turn in the phased distribution. However, because of the limited supply of vaccine, the slow localized distribution process in some places, inequitable access, and state politics, those are among the things that we're having to face in most states. They also mentioned the anti-vaccination movement and skepticism about the safety of the COVID vaccines, which are, they have been somewhat rushed. And so the big question on the table that many, well, really all school district leaders are grappling with is, should districts require their staff to take the COVID-19 vaccine? So let that sink in for a minute. Should districts require their staff to take the COVID-19 to be able to work at that district? The U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which enforces workplace and discrimination laws, released guidance around this. And legally, there's nothing to prohibit a school district or an employer from mandating a COVID-19 vaccination. The agency didn't endorse, which is requiring the vaccine, or say that you couldn't do it, but they talked about the conditions and things that you need to take into consideration if you are thinking about requiring. District leaders spoke to the need for state and local guidance on this before making a decision, right? And that's only fair that school districts sort of get guidance from their county health departments, from maybe the governor, but just know that there is that understanding out there that there is the possibility that school districts may be requiring that. So we're not going to get into the business of educating a vaccine that is not mandated at the state level. But I think at some point that may happen, said the superintendent of Fort Bend Independent School District in Texas. If you think about how it impacts families, if we say you can't come without a vaccine, that's going to be a sizable number. I think it's safe to think that policy needs to be widespread around the acceptance that we can mandate employees to get the vaccine. So at this point, if you're diabetic, if your BMI is over 30, or if you're considered obese, of course, that's what the health departments are considering, that people, I won't call them all employees because not all people are employees, but that's what you're being encouraged to do. So if you have a concern to be vaccinated, you need to have that conversation with your school administrator. We need to make sure that we're putting safeguards in place so that all employees feel safe, right? And that everyone that we're interacting with is safe. And so it is a tough decision for district leaders to get to the point where they must mandate the vaccine. But that's, frankly, like they said in the article, that's another burden that districts have got to bear in that decision making, right? So some district leaders have suggested maybe prioritizing staff over 65, those with comorbidities, maybe those working with high-risk students, and those who are in the school transportation and school meal business, that they certainly be the first to be required to get the vaccine, since they have so much interaction with kids. And in the school bus, it's a contained environment, right? So I'm just putting it out there. I'm not going to say whether we should or not. I'm here to make you reflect and think. And what should the school districts do? So districts should take into consideration that the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, which have been authorized by the FDA for emergency use, they're not FDA approved yet, but they have been approved for emergency use. Most healthcare places are not requiring to get their vaccines, which is interesting because it's not been all the way approved by the FDA. So, and here's another factor, because this is a nationwide podcast and articles that are written for the nation. Another factor to consider before deciding whether to require the vaccine are teacher unions. If you don't get the backing of your respective teacher labor organization, you may not have a successful vaccination program. So as you can see, there's so much to consider before we can really mandate, but please know that it's out there, right? The understanding of the importance of the vaccine is slowly but surely getting into all the workplaces and causing this kind of discussion. All right. So it is recommended for the school systems that we remain consistent in our policies for all employees. For example, if a district mandates vaccines for teachers, the failure to have a similar policy for substitute teachers might undermine the mandate for the staff. A district might have more control over the day-to-day activities of their employees if they make sure that all people coming into the workplace are getting are also having to have the vaccine. So, and what that means, and many of you don't realize that in a school district and in a school, you have, in the past, not lately, not since March of last year, but we have lots of outsiders that come into a building, right? Now, that sounds scary for a minute, but it shouldn't be. And that is, we have substitutes, we have out of district consultants that come in, we have people who deliver things, supplies and so forth. And so there's lots of interaction that happens at every school campus. And that's why we have all the safety things in place, right? We have the locks at the doors, we have the doorbells, we have the intercoms where people must state who they are and what their business is. And so to get back into that regular life of regular interaction at a campus where we have all our kids there, all our teachers there, and people are free to come and go, parents can actually come in, which isn't happening right now. Parents, for the most part, do not come into the buildings anymore. All of that can start again, in theory, if everyone gets the vaccine. So again, I'm here to put that out there and have you reflect, and my hope is that you'll actually take this information and chat with your teacher friends, chat with your educator friends, chat with your loved ones, your friends about how do I feel if my employer will require me to get the vaccine. And so what role will the schools play in the vaccine distribution? And so this is an interesting topic about, and it starts off with this nurse who's been in the school business as a nurse for 3 decades. And of course, she's used to measles, tuberculosis, swine flu, all of those that are required vaccines, right? And so now we have this vaccine that has popped up within, gosh, less than a year, folks, 10 months, right? Isn't that amazing? The reason that we immunize children is because not only can they spread the disease within the school community where there's so much contact, within kids, but if we protect them in school, we're also protecting the broader community from the spread of these preventable diseases. So the school really has a huge role to play in the health of the broader community. Yet so much of what we have when it comes to that COVID vaccine is unclear. Meanwhile, amid a nationwide school nurse shortage in the country, we're increasingly divided over the coronavirus vaccine, school reopenings, and not to mention the regular support for immunization requirements for kids. We've had, and for the last many years, parents who don't want their kids vaccinated. And so some education advocates worry that maybe some schools won't be ready to help with the COVID vaccine. So the challenges ahead. Dr. Mario Ramirez, Managing Director of Opportunity Labs and a Senior Fellow at the Future Ed in Georgetown University, a McCourt School of Public Policy, says schools have played a very active role in vaccinations in prior epidemics. He says, I think given the breadth and scope of this pandemic, it's certainly reasonable to feel like the schools could play a role here, a very valuable role. It touched so many more people than the other public institutions. Yet Ramirez, a physician and former acting director of the Federal Office of Pandemic and Emerging Threats, said schools face 2 major hurdles: logistics and public trust. A quarter of schools in the United States have no school nurse, and others may have some part-time nurse medic or nurse aide who splits their time and hours between several schools. Fewer than 40% of schools have a full-time nurse medic aide employee. Additionally, a survey of NASN members from earlier this year shows that many felt their schools weren't ready for the COVID-19 outbreak. And then storing the COVID-19 vaccine in schools could provide some challenges as well. There are several vaccine candidates. The Pfizer vaccine has to be stored at temperatures that are so cold that schools wouldn't really be a valid distribution point unless there's a movement of ultra cold freezers out to the schools, which right now, I don't, ultra cold freezers, from my understanding, and I heard something recently, are at a premium. And so being able to send them out to, well, just in Texas, there's 1,154 districts or something, and each one of them has, well, I won't say each one, but many have many schools. So imagine trying to keep that vaccine, that cold, in every school. So preliminary data from Pfizer shows that it can be 90% effective with study participants. The company expects to produce up to 50 million doses this year and up to 1.3 billion in the time to come. So Moderna, let's talk a little bit about Moderna, are also among companies with vaccines coming in the coming months, but Moderna has warned that a vaccine may still not stop the spread of virus, a detail likely to further complicate the issue. I don't know what, they didn't say more than that, but guidance from the National Academics of Science, Engineering, and Medicine also suggests that COVID-19 vaccine availability to children may still be a long way off, and Ramirez doesn't see that happening this school year. Healthcare workers, older adults, and those with comorbid conditions are among the first groups that have access, as we know. K-2 teachers and school staffs are included in phase 2, and children will be part of phase 3. There's some logistical concerns that are going to need to be ironed out over the next 2 or 3 months, but then all of that will be wrapped up into bigger societal issues as well. And the long simmering national debate over childhood immunization and vaccination is, going to have to be part of that discussion. So in 2015 and 19, 84% of Americans believe parent vaccinating their children was or is extremely important, which was actually down from 94% in 2001. So although still the majority think it's important, it's still down 10 points. As far as it relates to COVID-19, 6 months ago, public interest in the vaccine was really high. And then all the political infighting tied to the presidential campaign and concerns about safety profiles, many of which were kind of rooted in conjuncture, drove the confidence level down. So people are hesitant because of the speed of the federal government's vaccine development process, which was dubbed Operation Warp Speed. Gallup data from September shows that only 50% of people surveyed said that they will get the vaccine, down from 61% in August and 66% in July. But Ramirez said, expect that numbers will shift as we get some actual reporting about the side effects and how efficient it is. So interesting numbers here. Combs states says that states are in the planning stages of what a vaccine rollout will look like, and they don't have any data on what it would look like for schools. And yet we know, she said, the nurse that we talked about earlier, that knows that some school districts are at work building community trust in preparation for a vaccine. And it's funny, I said this and I've heard other people say this sort of laughingly, but we sort of mean it. And that is, they really should allow vaccine rollout at the schools based on what we saw back in March and early April with the rollout, the very quick rollout of the devices and meals and online curriculum for kids when the COVID first hit and we were shut down. I think we need to stop thinking of our schools as no can do's and turn to them as our opportunity to access the community as far as getting them healthier and being able to take part in the discussion around how to keep communities healthier, especially when it comes to the vaccine. In South Carolina, for example, school districts added a school nursing staff to more than 100 schools this year, ensuring at least one full-time nurse. So COVID is having, again, we've got our COVID blessings, right? And the district has added an immunization coordinator position. And so there are states preparing for the COVID rollout, vaccine rollout. While these changes have more to do with federal guidelines and because they received a grant, in order to offer the required immunizations at no cost to children who can't afford them, the COVID-19 tipped the scale to the district's decision to boost the nursing numbers. So You know, it's good that South Carolina was able to hire 100 people. I don't want to shame them by saying that maybe should have been there before, but okay. I think school nurses are going to be an important part of when we get the vaccine, and it's all going to take all hands on deck for our healthcare providers, but also healthcare providers such as nurses in schools, so that we can help with the distribution. And so it's good to hear that there are states that are turning to the schools and looking to the schools to help with the vaccine distribution. I've said this before, and that is, once a school builds an interpersonal relationship with a family, and that is that if a family in crisis is turns to the school as the first place to go when they are in crisis, then we have built that interpersonal relationship to the point where the parent then will give us what we need if we come and say, we need your child at tutoring, we need your child to behave differently. The parent will be much more receptive. And so here's another way, through vaccine distribution, that possibly the schools can continue building trust within their school community. People normally feel that school is a safe place, says Nurse Combs. If we were to ask to be host clinics in a school setting, that would probably make people feel a little bit comfortable about taking their kids to the school to do that if they couldn't get into their clinics, right? In New Mexico's Alamogordo public schools, school officials are also building school trust with local community. A renovated Winnebago RV named Flo has been created to use it as a mobile unit in antibody testing. So this RV, Flo, named after Florence Nightingale, goes around the district with a COVID-19 test and antibody testing, as well as, of course, community outreach. And it also plans to do now hearing and vision tests within it. So I'm glad to see that our, again, our very used to be thought of as archaic school districts are actually stepping up again in different ways to become and stay, in many cases, not only become, but stay community assets to their school community. And so we have much to learn from what's going on in other districts and other states. Whew. So we have talked about the inauguration. We've talked about what's going on in the vaccine, COVID vaccine world. Now I want to shift gears a little bit because of our COVID time. We have a combination of things going on at different districts. One is that all the kids have asked to come back, and we frankly have had districts that say, if you can't come to face-to-face learning, then you'll have to withdraw and go to another district. We actually have had districts say that. And then we have districts who continue to do a combination of remote and face-to-face. So within this messiness that is school for this school year, this continuing COVID school year, as some of you may have read in the news, we have kids that we call los desaparecidos, the disappeared ones. And that is kids who have not reported to school, or who report to school very irregularly. And so there's a couple of articles that caught my eye, and I thought I would bring on our truancy judge expert, Judge John Payton, to not only talk about these articles, but also share what he's seeing out in the field. And actually, I can also add to what I'm seeing in the field as I'm becoming a truancy magistrate for our district. So like I said, there's been a spike in unexplained school absences during the pandemic, which will lead, it says could, no, it will lead to truancy troubles for thousands of students impacted by factors ranging from homelessness to lack of home internet. And we've already seen that, right? And this is a very recent article, so it continues to be. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, a disproportionate number of low-income students and students of color were sent to juvenile court for truancy infractions, and now schools are struggling to account for chronically absent students who have gone missing from their enrollment counts during the distance learning. And you know, what we're trying to do as school districts, certainly my district is, and I know Judge Payton is working with districts who are trying to do that right thing by trying to keep them out of the legal system. And then in the article, it contends that some truancy advocates have said that maybe the time has come to shift away from the harsh punishments for truancy problems and move to more positive reinforcements. And it names Texas, as a matter of fact. Texas, a state long known for being tough on truant students, is cited as being ahead of the curve on such a move, having decriminalized truancy in 2015. So, Judge Payton, let me sort of use that bullet to talk about what you saw before COVID. You retired right before COVID, so your information is still pretty new. What were you seeing before COVID, and now what are you seeing a year in, or almost a year in?
So first of all, good morning, Dr. Good, and to all of the people that tune in and follow Dr. Good, good morning. And what a phenomenal opportunity we have to have a public ed expert and advocate for us. So Dr. Good, thank you for all you're doing to make this happen. You know, prior to COVID-19 and the pandemic, what we saw was pretty standard, I would say. When I say standard, keep in mind I've seen over 98,000 truancy cases at that time. So for me, standard is family breakdown, social breakdown, which can lead to emotional distress, mental health issues, and substance abuse. And then a smaller percentage of students that we saw that suffered with absenteeism were students with mental illness, where it would go undiagnosed and then not be properly treated, or kids that would get to determine what was going to happen in their household versus the parent, which I call family breakdown, where the parent's not requiring mental illness treatment for their students. You know, some of it was economic, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, there was always a way to find help, even if there was an economic disadvantage. You know, one of the articles that you were speaking about, one of my favorite lines in that article, and I'm going to paraphrase it, is that absenteeism is one of the leading causes to educational inequity. And so, you know, it's interesting, we throw poverty out a lot, you know, poverty, oh, poverty this, poverty that. But before the pandemic, I would say that the impoverished families that I saw in truancy court over my 28 years was probably about 15%, maybe 20%. 80 to 85% were okay. Now, I'm not saying they were wealthy. I'm not saying that they were doing financially fantastic, but they paid their bills. They had a home. And it was just, again, it was a lot of social family breakdown. And so now fast forward and let's go through the pandemic. Mental health. Mental health is the striking match on this, and the pandemic is the gasoline. And as the students are going through this and that match is striking, I mean, we are just putting our kids in flames. And we have got to come down with some consistency on how we help them. And I think we're doing a lot. I think that we are making an effort as a society. I mean, Dr. Good, you talked about 3 weeks ago, the mental health program that you went through, where you could be a mental health advocate for your kids and families. That's huge. 2 years ago, Dr. Good, they would have never had that. You know, it'd have been go to a counselor or go to a therapist, instead of arming our educators and business leaders with the ability to be a mental health advocate to help families. And so The key is getting those resources out and then getting those families to react and respond. One of the biggest things I see in the pandemic that is contributing to mental health is also what the parents are having to go through and the shifting of what's going on with their jobs or with their schedules or their ability to be home for their kids. I think we're finding out that this is going to create a whole new latchkey kid system. I don't know if you remember back in the 80s when we had the big latchkey kids where kids were being given keys and walking home from school, and they would be home for 2 or 3 hours because we'd hit an era in our society where mom couldn't stay home or dad couldn't stay home anymore. I had to have a 2-person family workers. And so I think that contributes as a result of the pandemic. And so when the parents are feeling anxiety or angst as a result of their financial situation, the kids are feeling it as well. One of the things my mom used to always tell me, she would tell me if I caught a glimpse of an adult issue in the house, she would say, "You don't worry about that. That's an adult issue, and I will handle that. You worry about being a kid." And so I hope that all parents will approach their children that way and not allow it to, we live in a real world and it does bleed over. So it's interesting. So Payton Nixon Associates, we've encountered now roughly 1,000 students that we have held tribunals for. And I would say that Dr. Good, out of those 1,000, mental health on almost every one of them. And I'm talking kids now coming in and advocating for themselves, saying, "Hey, I want to be back in the classroom. I need to be back in campus. I can't do this sitting in front of my monitor for 8 hours. It's driving me crazy, and I'm not going to do it anymore." And so, but now it's interesting. We're getting into that second tier. And as I'm starting to see new students on Tuesday, and one of the districts that I work with, it was almost like a normal truancy day. Defiant, issues at home, anger, depression, and then self-medicating with substance abuse. And so all of a sudden it became oh, this is a regular truancy day for me. And it's like, okay, this I know how to deal with and I can impact. And so I'm starting to see, I think we've gotten past that first layer of mental health. And now I'm starting to move into the actual, what I call my normal truancy cases.
So I had a day yesterday where I did tribunals. I did 17 out of 22 showed up. And I did have mental health issues, especially with the older secondary kids. And I did have to order some back to the campus. The parents are afraid for their kids, but their kids have sent them a message saying, "You know what, I'm not going to do well at home. I want to be at school." And so we sort of did the kid a favor, right? We said, "Hey, mom, they need to go back to school," and to the face-to-face, right? And so I feel like as we go through these processes, and I absolutely love the approach, by the way, that I've been trained on making sure that the approach was all about social emotional approach and not that harsh, and how can we help you? And, if the teacher's doing that, thank you for telling us. All of that, parents being heard as they went through this scary tribunal, because I had parents, especially the Hispanic parents, and some of people don't know I speak Spanish, so I oftentimes will volunteer to do all the Spanish speakers. And I mean, we had parents who, first of all, had never had truancy issues before, okay? So many of them. They're horrified, first of all. And then second of all, we had parents who were horrified at the mere thought of going to court, right? And so being able to add the social emotional care to our approach made all the difference in the world. And so I even had the young lady who was helping me sort of be my bailiff and my clerk and so forth. She said, "Man," because I asked her, I said, "Was my approach okay?" Sometimes we need outsiders to tell us, right? And so she said, "Yeah," especially that one mom who she came in angry. And so we were able to diffuse her a little bit and get her heard. because that's what I find in the Ask Dr. Be Good, when parents come to me and they're angry at their school and they're angry at their administrators or their teacher, and then I hear them. I can't tell you how quickly and I know that you see that every day when you do your tribunals as well, that parents just want to feel heard. And then we can start the work of getting the problem fixed.
You know, I think also, and you and I have spoken about this, Dr. Good, many a times, it's sharing in the understanding. In other words, having empathy for the situation. Yesterday, I had a mom who was super, super angry, very frustrated. She had to leave work, and you know, she's got 3 kids, and if we can't get this schooling thing right, then she's just going to remove everybody, and we're screwing this up. And so I said, we're just as frustrated as you are. I said, the pandemic has definitely put everybody in a position that that's not a norm for them. And we're all trying to figure it out. I said, I said, look at me. I was planning on being on campus, and then we had an alarm go off that there was maybe some exposure. I said, so I took my computer and I showed her this room I was in, and it had multiple chairs stacked up, desks stacked up. And I'm like, this is where I'm officing out of today. I said, I'm just as frustrated as you are. And I said, but that doesn't help the kids at all. And so she came down and was able to say, yeah. And she goes, you know what? And I'm going to tell you something. See those 2 girls back there? I'm not defending them. They don't get up on time. They're not signing in like they're supposed to. So all of a sudden the shift happened. You know, once we were able to let her say her piece, it came down to, hey, my kids aren't doing what they're supposed to. But when it came to her son, he's working full time to help pay the bills because mom had lost her job. And she just recently got reemployed. And so she was struggling. And she's like, what do we do with him? And he's a senior who's not going to get any credits in the first semester. And I know that a Mr. Chaparro is a pretty amazing guy. So we're going to set up a time where we sit down with Mr. Chaparro and we go over what can we do to recover his senior credits first semester and get him back on track. So I think the key is stepping back, stepping out of the ego of who we all are and saying what's best for the kid and how do we get there. And it's not going to be everybody go to Saturday school and now we're fine.
I had 2 seniors yesterday, well-spoken young men, and they're 18. They took the call, they got the email. Mom was there in one of the cases. The other one, he was just leaving work, and he admitted that work had interfered. But they both were very intent on regaining the ground they had lost so that they could graduate on time. And so sometimes they just needed that little kick in the pants, right? And I told them I'd check back with them in 2 weeks. And so that accountability may be the only thing those 2 seniors needed to graduate on time. And so why are we spending time on the Ask Dr. Be Good show to talk about this? Well, from an educator standpoint, please know that kids that are, and it may not be happening yet in your district, but it will be happening, kids that are not appearing in your class, the district is doing something about them. The district wants because it's the right thing to do, but from a monetary standpoint, the district wants to find and count every single one of the kids that are supposed to be in your classroom. And so I hope that you hear, educators, that we have districts all over the area that are managing those kids that aren't coming to your class. But from a parent standpoint, also please know that this is being watched. Most of you are going to be that, fantastic parent that makes sure your kid is at school or online at 7:45 or 8:30, whatever time your district has set. But there are a few of you here that have allowed your child to maybe not get on first period on time, or maybe not do last period all the way. And that comes at a cost. And that cost comes up in these tribunal meetings that we have with parents and kids about why their schoolwork is lacking. And you can say it better than me because you've seen more kids than me, but I will tell you there's a direct correlation between how many periods these kids missed versus their grades. When I put them side by side, there was no student that I saw out of the 17 yesterday that had good grades because of the many, with the many attendance issues they had.
Well, and
can't do it.
To add to that, Dr. Good, and I was going to correlate the two. If you're not in class, you can't pass the class. And it was interesting. I had a couple parents initially, my kid's logging on, my kid's in that class. I'm sitting right there next to them. And so we would pull the attendance up and share it. And I'm like, well, where you see the W's, that's where they're saying he was there. I know he was there. I know she was there. You're wrong. And I'm like, well, okay, let's look at that then. Can you bring the report card up? Well, I know he's doing well because he's turning all of his work in. 50, 50, 0, 7, 23, 98. He's going to that class. And I said, if he's turning all of his work in, how do we correlate with the grades to the attendance then? Are you sure you're sitting there watching him? Well, I did catch him on Fortnite the other day. Oh, he was sitting in his computer, but he wasn't necessarily logged into his class. And so you're absolutely right. The grades equal attendance. Now, there are a few students out there, percentage-wise, Dr. Good, who they can sit down. My father was one of those. Not receive any instruction, not go to class, sit down, do the work, and get 100 in every class.
If we had more kids like that, we wouldn't have to have school.
Right. Again, very few percentage, small percentage.
Yeah. So as always, we're winding down to the end of our hour, but I hope everyone feels like I'm bringing the most important part of the weekly Pub Ed news. Certainly, we talked about how you can make the inauguration become a more real and important, relevant part of our schools and our kids' lives. And so parents at home, teachers at school, please make sure that the inauguration is a part of your talk in the next few days. And Judge Payton, I didn't mean for you to pop out, but thank you for being on. I just like to summarize. You're a big part of our world because you're in the field. And so being able to come on and share with parents the work that's being done in the back room, right? Parents don't understand all that stuff that happens in the back room. And you're part of that back room stuff that makes kids better because it helps with the social emotional things that are happening in the home. And so let me thank you for that. And you'll continue to be a part of our world because you're going to continue to see things in that field much faster and much closer than even some of our educators, right? Think about that.
Oh, sure.
You're seeing the deep and dirty in our families that are causing these absences that many times our teachers are not aware of, right? The parents are not sharing that with our teachers. So thank you for that. And thank you for everyone for being on today. Again, if you missed it the first time, we rebroadcast on Thursdays at 6 p.m., Sundays at 8 a.m. And as always, write your questions in the chat so you can be an interactive part of the Ask Dr. Be Good show. We hope that you did leave a little bit more educated in some of the good things happening in public education, and that all of us must be cognizant of the fact that, and I didn't talk about this, and I'm out of time, our legislative session started. So, Judge, we have lots to talk about and continue to need to talk about as we go through the weeks. And so we may even have you come on to talk about your legislative experience in running for office, because that's, you've lived a very interesting life. So thank you, everyone. And let's have a